and welcome to another edition of The Front Page on GNet TV. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the managing editor of the Manchester Journal, and I'll be your host today. And today it's my extreme pleasure to have with us here in the studio of GNet TV in Sunderland our four area representatives to the State House in Montpelier. Going from my right to left, we have Cynthia Browning and Jeff Wilson, who both represent a new district that was created last year out of the redistricting program. They represent Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and most of Sunderland. And after Jeff, we have Patti Komline, who represents Dorset, Landgrove, Danby, Mount Tabor, and Peru. And a newcomer to the State House this year, Tim Goodwin, who represents Weston, Londonderry, Jamaica, Stratton, and Jamaica. Almost got it. Anyway, Tim, welcome, and good to have you with us. Tim is going to be representing the district that was represented up to last year by Oliver Olson. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the legislature has gotten off to what seems like a flying start from this perspective. We're here on Monday, January 28th. Last Thursday, the governor gave his budget address, and a number of interesting items, I think, were revealed in that. So I guess just to kind of get us started, I thought I'd sort of ask for your comments on the budget address. He had some interesting points there that I gather will provide some controversy of Montpelier. A welfare reform program, which I guess tightens the eligibility requirements for welfare recipients. Of course, a single-payer health care plan has been much discussed, and I guess will continue to be much discussed. There's interesting proposals on education funding and also on clean energy funding, and I think we're going to get to all of that and more. Cynthia, why don't I start with you? What did you take away from the governor's address? What did you think was good and maybe needs more work?
Well, as you may know, I really am in favor of a big overhaul of our budget and tax system. And in terms of doing tax reform or budget reform, the governor completely failed. I'm not averse to many of his particular proposals. I would be willing to consider any of them. But it struck me as really odd that the only sources of funding that he identifies are things like the earned income tax credit, so that you're taking from some poor working people to give them to different poor working people, or these scratch-off tickets, which we don't even really know how much revenue there might be. And then in the places where you would really have to come up with some money, he in his speech, he barely said anything at all, like this whole gas tax issue to fill the hole into transportation fund. He just said, hey, guys, we got to work together to figure this out. Well, to go back to the idea of overhauling things, my understanding, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, we've been taking money from the transportation fund to put it in the education fund for a long time. If we weren't doing that, we might not have a hole in the transportation fund, so we might not be having to raise gas taxes. Now, of course, we need it for the ed fund because there are lots of things in the ed fund that shouldn't be there. So we've got like this round robin of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and then we're just going to raise these little taxes because the governor doesn't want to raise broad-based taxes. I'm sorry, I think the gas tax is a broad-based tax. I think the property tax is a broad-based tax. And he has raised, or is talking about raising both of them. So to me, this year maybe we got to do this like Band-Aid patching kind of thing. But to me, we need to stop robbing the transportation fund and stop robbing the education fund and rationalize our tax and budget system. And then we wouldn't have to do this unseemly thing of taking money from poor people to give it to other poor people. Okay. So I was very disappointed in his budget address.
Jeff, what was your reaction?
Well, I think it was surprising, a number of aspects of the address. Specifically, that he did come out fairly ardently in support of welfare reform, in capping the number of years that an individual could stay on Reach Up, which is what we call our welfare program. And also, I think folks were surprised by him reducing the earned income tax credit and using that savings to pay for pre-K and childcare. So some of my liberal friends, really are looking at that and wondering if that indeed is a path we should go down. But I think much of the discussion last week had to do with the whole break open ticket issue. And people are just becoming somewhat more educated as to what those are. Some people know and some people don't.
I confess I'd
Patty's
never heard of them before.
Now, Patty's got a demo. Patty and I are both on Ways and Means.
Okay.
So we've had the demonstration last week, and Patti brought some show and tell with her to show your audience. But that was interesting in the sense that you're going to use that money to try to address some of the thermal efficiency issues in Lye Heap. It's creative, I'd say, but I don't know if there's a relationship there between break open tickets and thermal efficiency issues that one could put together. So, but we'll see how it goes. I want to keep an open mind. Patti and I are both on Ways and Means Committee, as I said, and we'll be looking at a number of these proposals as they come down the pike from the administration in our committee. So I want to hear, some of the arguments. But it was an interesting and surprising speech in some regards. But I do give him credit on the transportation front, because even though he wasn't specific in his speech, his administration did roll out a plan for funding the horrific gap we have in transportation funding, which is pegged about $240 million a year. And we do need to have good roads and bridges in Vermont if we're going to be a viable economic entity.
Well, Patti, over to you.
Well, I was pleased when the governor wants to reform the Reach Up program, and it's not as much about putting people out of the program, but holding the program accountable for what it does. It's supposed to provide a lot of training and support services and working with people to get them jobs. So I was glad to see that the governor is going to be working to improve that. He was addressing some poverty slopes versus cliffs. I've talked a lot about. I think some people are going to start to get tired of hearing me talk about that. So that was good to hear. I think the numbers are still being worked out as to the governor's proposal with regard to the earned income tax credit. People are still trying to figure out whether that's a winner or a loser all around. The thermal efficiency proposal, a bill we have, is to put a tax on heating fuel. So the governor, for weatherization, which is really important. But the governor's proposal with these scratch-off tickets, which is what I have here, was very creative. I don't know that the numbers were that accurate, but this is a ticket. Purportedly, what did you say, 259 million of these
250 million. That's
supposedly are sold. Interestingly enough, most of the people in the State House did not know what these were. So there's a small market for this, but a lot of people are using them. I think it works out to be about 60 tickets per person if you worked out the numbers, which seems a little... And the more we learned about them, it's pretty funky because... you can easily pocket money when you're selling these things too. There's no accountability for the money collected. And when you look at what other states sell in these, our numbers are really inflated. So I'm not sure it's really going to be effective. But it supposedly would raise $17 million, and I really think that should be going into the Ed Fund if it is, because all our lottery proceeds go to the Ed Fund. So someone in our committee, Jim Condon, has a bill that proposes that any money collected from these would go to the Ed Fund.
Okay.
So we'll see. And lastly, what the governor did not talk about was how to address in his budget address. He really didn't talk about how he was going to pay for things. Like, he didn't talk in the address. He didn't talk about the shortage in the transportation fund. He didn't talk about we're facing a 5-cent property tax increase, a budget shortfall, how he's going to pay for health care. Didn't talk about any of that, people were talking about that a lot. And what he didn't say.
Over to you guys to fill in the blanks, I guess, huh? Well, Tim, welcome to the legislative hurly-burly here. Before I ask you what your reaction was to the governor's speech, how has it been for the first couple of weeks as sort of the newcomer to the group? It must have been a fairly exciting couple of weeks.
It's been good, and I've had some practice answering that question. Believe it or not, you probably do believe it. It's a learning experience. It's very busy. Between trying to get a handle on what you should be doing and taking care of administrative items that need to be taken care of, you're very busy. I wish I trusted the Wi-Fi in the motel so that I could get a little bit more work done after hours there rather than staying in the State House. But it's interesting. It's fun. You're working with good people. Sometimes you don't see things in the same light as some of those other good people, but they're still good people, and it's fun to be with them.
Good. So what was your take on the governor's speech, and or actually both the inaugural and the budget speech?
I thought that I like to focus.
Mm-hmm.
I like to focus. I've received some emails from constituents that are concerned about the taking money out of out of the earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit proposal that the governor's making, of course, has no consequence at all with the federal
Mm-hmm.
earned income credit, and it is 32% of that. So the federal credit would stay in place, and 32%, some portion of that 32% would presumably, which is I think it's 80 million bucks. So he's talking about 17 million bucks that would come out of that 80. Obviously, that's not going to wipe it out, and I don't think we have enough information at this point in time to see what we might regard as damage there and where it lies. And so it's still certainly an up in the air thing. But I don't think it's a bad thing to throw out there. Let's put it that way. And I like the focus toward early ed. One of the things that I learned when I was going around and knocking on doors and shaking hands this summer was that people in my area anyway would really like to see some improvement in their roads. Mm-hmm. And I asked them point blank, would you be willing to pay for it? And I would say in more instances than not, they maybe got a little grudging about it because of the things that Cynthia's talked about that have happened historically. Mm-hmm. But they indicated, if they could be sure that money was going to go to improving their roads, that they'd, be willing to accept some increase in tax there. So whether or not the governor's proposal there is where it ought to be, I don't know. But it's certainly a proposal that might aim us in the direction of improving our infrastructure, which I think would be a real good idea.
Okay, well, a lot going on, obviously. Let's sort of take a few of these things point by point here, and I guess a good place to start, it seems to me, would be what seems to me anyway, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's the whole single-payer health care plan, which my understanding was prior to last Thursday was that we were going to get much more information about how this was actually going to get paid for, and the math was sort of going to get crunched, and my impression is that something somewhat less than that came forward last week. Cynthia, let me start with you again. What is your take on how we're going to pay for this single-payer plan? I know single-payer is not really the precisely accurate term to use, but Green Mountain Care, I guess, is the board that's assigned to develop this plan. I take it that you're a bit of a skeptic on how this is going to work so far. So why don't you tell us what you think should be going on with this?
Okay, well, first of all, let's just remind everybody that there are two things going on. We have the implementation of the federal health care law, which is the Health Benefits Exchange. We have to do that. That's going to start in this year and next year. So that's one component, and we got one part of the report on Thursday was how we're going to finance that. So that's going to happen. It has to happen. We're already doing it. So that's where people who can't get health insurance through their employers will get it through this exchange, and there'll be tax credits to subsidize their purchases if they're below a certain income level. So that's one component, and I support implementing that the best way we can for Vermonters, and I think we should be focusing on making that work, not worrying so much about what we're going to do in 2017. The second part of the report was about how this quote-unquote single-payer, state-financed insurance program would work that might come into effect in 2017. The problem is 2017 is a long ways away. And what the researchers actually had to do is they had to imagine where we will be in 2014 after the health benefits exchange has gone into effect, and then project where we might be in 2017 if we did the Green Mountain Care single payer based on their projection of where we might be in 2014. So it's a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
Yes, we have zero information about anything in the future. We have no information. We only have information about the past. We can make projections. We can make assumptions. We can, extrapolate. So this report, and the researchers say this explicitly, this report is based on a lot of extrapolation and a lot of assumptions. And if you change the numbers that they use, or if you change the assumptions that they use, the results of the report are going to change. So the report projects that we would save a small amount if we went to Green Mountain Care, but we would cover more people, we would finance it more equitably. This would all be under certain assumptions and certain conditions. My problem is, if you take some of those assumptions away, you don't save money, and you have to raise more tax revenue. They didn't run those alternative scenarios. So they end up saying, we're going to need this amount of tax revenue. It's less than you're spending now. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the fact that we're not telling you what tax we're going to get.
So the trade-off then is we're going to raise about $1.6 billion in new taxes, but save $1.9 billion
No,
premiums that are...
No, that's not my understanding. My understanding is that the correct comparison, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the correct comparison is that right now we're paying $1.9 billion in premiums and out-of-pocket costs, and under their proposed system, it would be $1.6 billion in tax revenue. So in other words, the tax revenue replaces the premiums and out-of-pocket costs.
Okay.
But that comparison, saying, hey, it's going to cost you less in tax revenue than it is now, depends on all those assumptions, assuming that federal funds will be available, assuming that when people have cheaper health care, they won't use more of it, assuming that the administrative costs will be available. They also exclude from their cost structure of Green Mountain Care the cost of reserves. In other words, what would happen if there's a recession and tax revenue falls? How will you pay for health care? They don't include the cost of reserves. They don't include the cost of the systems, the IT, the administration setup. So they have created an analysis that is very favorable for Green Mountain Care. And I don't fault them for that. This is a political document. The administration wants to say that. But they should have also provided alternative scenarios. What if we don't get the federal funds? What if people use more health care? Why didn't they project tax revenue needed out? They give $1.6 billion. What, that's going to be forever, $1.6 billion? I don't think so. So I really fault this study because it wasn't complete enough. I don't feel that the projections can be relied upon. All you have to look at is 2017 versus 2013, and you know that you need to be very careful about relying. I want to just put that on the back burner and just pay attention to what we have in front of us. Make the health benefits exchange work for Vermonters. Solve as many problems as we can. Then in 2016, we look at where we are. Do we need to go back to the single payer, or have we dealt with most of our problems? So I feel that people are fixated with the single payer as some kind of panacea. And there are ways to address all the problems of equity and access and quality of care now. Mm-hmm. Why are we saying that single payer, we have to wait till 2017? Right. I'm sorry.
I sense all the rest of you eager to jump in and raise some questions about this. So what do the rest of you feel? I mean, I guess my own feeling has been that after Obamacare was passed by Congress, it seemed like, why would Vermont not simply want to wait and kind of piggyback along with the federal program instead of going ahead with our own unique state program? But I know for a lot of folks, the idea of overhauling the healthcare and health insurance industries here in the state is a very big deal. Jeff, you're also on the Ways and Means Committee, and you guys will be, I'm sure, tackling with this whole question. Were you surprised that the governor's plan did not provide more details, or is that kind of, well, it's kind of up to us to craft how we're going to do this?
Act 48 in 2011 specifically required the administration to put forward a specific financing recommendation for, as Cynthia said, compliance with the ACA Affordable Care Act. as well as the Green Mountain Care plan, whatever that may be, referred to as single payer. And it said that those recommendations shall be forthcoming in January of 2013. So everybody anticipated that you would see some very specific financial recommendations on both of those issues. And we only saw the one relative to the near-term goal of compliance with so-called Obamacare. And the second part, although there were some nice graphs and tables, I concur with what Cynthia said, that it's almost a waste of money, time, and irrelevant at this stage, because anything we can do outside of the four corners of the ACA cannot happen until 2017. So last year I was advocating, okay, we recognize now, last year, that you can't do single payer until 2017. The hope in 2011 was, well, we might get a waiver. The governor kept saying, maybe we can do it in 14, 15, 16. But it became abundantly clear to me that we could not do that last year. And I was advocating that let's not even do the single payer analysis now. Let's put that off and just concentrate on the ACA, so that we focus our energies and efforts on compliance with the federal law. But also, I thought that would relieve some of the confusion that Vermonters are witnessing and feeling about this whole single payer versus Obamacare. That didn't happen. Unfortunately, I lost that battle. So last week, we still had the report. The report had what we needed, at least as a great starting point on Obamacare. But on the other part of the equation, I just don't think it was we should have left it out altogether, because we did not get the specific recommendations, and we did get some information. And some of that information, though, because all the things may change between now and 17, I'm not sure how helpful that information is, but it did show, I think, to some folks that, surprisingly, that the savings under the Green Mountain Care would be fairly modest compared to what we had anticipated. So,
35 million, I think.
Yeah, first year it grows in some of the out years. So anyway, I see that as a distraction more than anything, and still creating some confusion. And I think that we should really just focus on Obamacare at this point in time.
Okay. So Patti, you're also on Ways and Means, which will be, I'm sure, tackling this.
Interesting. Yeah, the savings we talk about. Interestingly, this year we have savings in Medicaid of $68 million. Last year, I can't recall the number, but it was over $20 million in savings.
Right.
We're in the black from Medicaid. Medicaid, both of those. And we weren't told why we have the savings. Less people are using the system, but they don't know why. So you kind of, as Cynthia said, you want to know how you got to where you are before you go forward. I would think we need to understand how we're seeing, we're in the black for the first time in years. This is great. So if we've seen $68 million in savings this year, without doing all these major changes, maybe we're doing something right. Let's take a look at what that is. One thing that was proposed that I really liked was addressing the cost shift, was taking more money and supplementing Medicaid. We shortchange doctors, and so they're talking about taking some of that money and reimbursing doctors at a higher rate, which will be a positive effect on our insurance rates. But then they're going to tax hospitals in a different way. So I'm not, we don't know whether, they're giving them some money and they're taking from somewhere else.
Peter to pay Paul or something like that? Or?
Yeah, there's just so much we don't know, and it's been said. But one thing that was said repeatedly when I was in the healthcare committee by the head of the Green Mountain Care Board was, we cannot do single payer in Vermont. The goal of the Green Mountain Care Board is not to do single payer. And I found it really interesting that we keep talking about it, and the governor keeps talking about it. Politically, it spins well, but in order to, we can't include Medicaid recipients. We can't include Medicare people. We can't include military people. We can't include people who, ERISA, people who have their insurance from out of state. There are so many groups of people, the military, that you can't put into your single payer system that's the majority of the population.
So by excluding all those groups, then you basically are
You have a much
shrinking
smaller
the pool to the
a much
point
smaller
where
pool.
it's not economically viable? Is that?
Well, the question is it economically viable? But the point is, you cannot have everybody. The public wants this. They think if everybody goes in there and we're all going to. There's a lot of people who think we're all going to get free health care. But the more people you leave out of the pool, the more that stresses that smaller pool. Then you have the fights with the unions. You're going to have these fights with the teachers' unions, the fights with the state employees' union that don't want to be in here either, and that's a constant.
Why don't they want to be in it?
Because they want their own health care, just like Congress. It's Obamacare for everybody, but not for Congress. They like their health
They
care.
have better plans currently.
There's a lot of people that don't want to be in this, but they're being forced into it, and there are groups that can't be forced into it. So we can't get to single payer.
Interesting.
I think it's been pretty well stated before me. But I do wish that I'd paid a little more attention to a Rutland Herald article that I read either yesterday or today now, because I think it put a lot of this in a context that's probably easier for a lot of people to grasp, I think, because I think everybody knows what rounding off is, like you round off 9.5 to 10, and I think the projected savings were referred to by somebody who wrote an article in the Rutland Herald as being about the equivalent of a rounding error.
Yeah.
So that kind of puts those savings
$35 million
in a context.
$2 billion.
5.9 billion.
5.9
and you're
billion,
going to save
okay.
35 million.
Yeah.
35 million sounds like a lot of money, but I suppose when you're talking about the larger context,
Over 5 billion, it really isn't
it's a rounding
It
error.
really isn't a lot, and Cynthia well described. I think that there are a lot of variables in there, and if one or more of them shift a little bit,
Yeah,
$35 million isn't very much money.
Well, okay, so it'll be interesting to see going forward just how aggressively then this plan gets pushed by the administration as to whether or not they listen to you folks here and say, well, wait a second here, or full speed ahead. It'll certainly be something we'll be all following with great interest down here at the other end of the state. So there's all kinds of other stuff going on as well. Let's just hop back a second to the governor's inaugural speech, and talk about that for a second. I think, along with a lot of people, were kind of struck by his emphasis on education in the speech. Kind of broke with precedent and tradition in the speech by focusing on that. Do you feel that some of the points, I'll just throw it out to each of you, you can comment as you wish. The whole focus on education seemed like it went over very well, and there's a consensus, I think, that the economy of the future definitely depends on having the best possible level of education here, so that the era when a high school graduate could go off and get a good paying job and have a middle class lifestyle is certainly fading away. Do you think that some of the plans or proposals that the governor talked about in his inaugural address, particularly with the pre-K education and supporting the state universities to a greater extent, I think there were 4 main points altogether that he made, will be acted upon, or there will be some activity or something actually happening as a result of that, or was it sort of a speech that kind of everyone could agree with, but when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of actually making it happen, that's going to be a whole other story? Okay, you first.
Well, he proposed a number of things. He proposed greater tuition support for Vermont students going to Vermont colleges, or actually I think it was UVM. Mm-hmm. He proposed various ways to do that. He proposed dual enrollment so that you could get both high school and college credit for taking a certain kind of course. So he proposed a number of things that I think most people would be interested in pursuing. But as usual, he didn't say how he's going to pay for it. And see, that's the problem. To my mind, in the context of my idea of reforming our budget and tax system, if you really want to support education, you should start by using the education fund only for education. And there are a lot of different tax expenditures and really programs in there that are not education. They're agriculture or they're housing or they're something else. By the way, UVM has a tax. We pay UVM's property taxes to the tune of like $10 million. So if you're talking about how much do we support UVM, you need to include that in the support. And I think most people are not aware of that. Now, maybe they should pay not the full freight, but if you're going to subsidize them, we need to understand that we're doing that. So I would want to reform the education fund so that our state education property taxes are being used only for pre-K, since we're including that, to high school. And you do that first. And you crank up your math and your science teaching in that context. And then the other things are good too. But to hear him talk about how education is this great thing when he's been part of robbing the education fund and driving up property taxes and making it harder to finance education, and he has no interest in looking at those tax expenditures. I know, because I keep proposing it, and he doesn't want to look at it. I'm sorry, I thought it was hypocritical.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess I found it kind of interesting that as I understand, part of the rationale for the pre-K program, which would allow youngsters, obviously under 5 or so, to go to school, would be to allow like working moms and parents to have affordable childcare, basically, and that tied in, I think, to some degree to the welfare plan, if I'm not way off base here, that part of the reason do wind up being on welfare, or the Reach Out program, as it's called here in the state, for more than, I guess, a total of 5 years is what the governor wants to limit it to, was because of the lack of really affordable child care, and the pre-K program would dovetail neatly into that.
Yeah, but why didn't he look at one of the tax expenditures that go to high-income people? Why did he look at the earned income tax credit? That's the only tax expenditure he's looking at. It's really interesting to me. There's $1.3 billion of tax expenditures, credits, deductions, and exemptions. And the only one he goes to finance child care services or pre-K education, which we would all support, is the one that's already for the working poor. He doesn't go for anything that's benefiting middle to high income people or any other special group. So that's what bothers me.
Do you think this earned income credit idea has a chance of getting...
I think it could use some reform. As the governor said, ours is among the most generous in the country. And with regard to, I would challenge what Cynthia's saying about the low income is not affecting the higher income. The property tax rate is set to go up by 5 cents. That's going to hit the
That's
upper
a staggering
middle
number to me. I mean, in the past, I remember intense emotional arguments about a tax rate that went up by one penny.
And that's about, I think, is this right, $225 per $100,000 home.
But he says it's not a broad-based tax, remember. He says it's not broad-based.
Well, I mean, that's going. So I will agree with Cynthia that we have to talk about how to pay for what we have. I also, it's all sounded really good. And the dual enrollment, I really support. I think we had problems last year, and it was, again, how to pay for it, and it kind of fell apart. Because, and I know teachers, I thought they weren't going to be really excited to hear his speech, because they're strapped in what they teach, the curriculum that they have. And it's, that's a major shift in curriculum change, which we may need, but it's going to be a long conversation. It's not going to be fixed in a year.
The 5 years, I'm sure you recognize this, is 3 consecutive years, and then
2 years of
two
extension
additional years
later on,
that are non-consecutive. And I think there's some synergy between the welfare reform and the education proposal. It may need work, but I think there's synergy. I don't know how many people realize we are. The governor said that we're generous in the earned income tax credit. I checked out. We are generous. We might not be quite as generous as one might be led to think by listening to his speech, but we are generous. And I think probably a lot of people don't realize that tax credit is, some tax credits are, you can use them against your tax. You can wipe out your tax. The earned income tax credit, as Vermont does it, which not all states do it that way, is a refundable credit. So really it's a transfer payment if the credit exceeds the tax on your return. And I think there might be some room there.
This 5-cent increase on the property taxes is, I think, a rather striking question here. Is this going to work? I mean, do you feel like they're going to be, first of all, do we need to raise it 5%?
Well, it's arithmetic, basically. And it's more than 5 cents in the sense that, well, let me back up. The estimate we have now before us is that the base rate will go up 5 cents. But when you look at above base spending plus the base amount, and you look at the average statewide, some towns will spend less, some towns will spend more, but the average estimate statewide is that the total rate will go up 9 cents. And that's earth-shaking, I think.
Wow.
But the math is the math, in that you have increased spending by schools and a declining tax base because values are going down. And so, when you do the arithmetic, and that's where it comes out. Now, how do you mitigate that? That's a tough nut to crack. You can revise the whole system, but nobody's quite been able to put those. Most people haven't been able to put those, connect those dots in a way that comports to the Brigham decision. Or you can funnel new general fund money into the mix, which would be nice, but we're already looking at a $60 to $80 million FY14 general fund deficit, a hole that needs to be filled. Or you can nibble away at the edges. We're taking this up in Ways and Means Tuesday. That'll be tomorrow, actually. And I've got 2 amendments that won't even affect the 14 because you've got to go a year ahead. It'll be FY15. But one is to actually eliminate small school grants, and the other is to reduce the maximum amount of benefit per taxpayer that one can receive through income sensitivity from $8,000 to $5,000. Those 2 things will save $10 million. I don't know what the chances are. I mean, everybody and their brother's got a small school in their district. It becomes a political issue. My sense is, though, that the small school grant is something we simply can't afford anymore. So I want to at least do a little bit to try to reduce that impact on the expenditure side. And the whole small school thing really runs counter to our efforts to try to regionalize and consolidate. So, it won't be that popular. I'm going to try it in Ways and Means tomorrow. We'll see how the vote goes. But to do something dramatic as far as reducing property taxes, educational property taxes, I'm not sure what that's going to be if communities continue to increase costs and the tax base remains stagnant.
Because voters in their own towns vote these budgets in, and that's essentially what drives this tax rate.
Right, and I think Vermonters are very supportive of education. That's great, and we do have generally, I think, a good educational system. I think the governor is right to focus on education and its relationship to good jobs in the future. But he's hamstrung, I think, what his initiatives, even though he makes the case for, investing in education. His initiatives are, not game changers by any stretch of the imagination, because the dough isn't there to do anything more, really, in any great extent. We just don't have the money.
Well, just to go back to this question of what's driving the cost in the education fund is about $1.2 billion or $1.3 billion. There are $280 million worth of these special tax provisions that reduce or eliminate the property taxes of certain entities or groups or individuals. Many of them are very valid and worthy programs. They're just not education. So what we need to do is we need to do tax reform that gets them out of the education fund and finance them in the general fund. They will cost less, because if you take them out of the education fund, the property tax rate comes down like 20 cents. So you're going to still have to subsidize, UVM if you want to, or income sensitivity, but you do it in the general fund. We've got a vicious cycle in the education fund. The property tax rates go up, so the exemptions to the property tax that we've already put in place cost more within the education fund. It's a vicious cycle. You got to rip the thing off. So if you do it in the context of broader tax reform with the income tax as well, you would have some money that you could use to fund those programs outside of the education fund. 20 cents, it could come down. So that would accommodate these expenses that are truly for education. So this is what I'm getting at. The recession, the increasing costs in different places have like broken apart. They've revealed the fractures, the cracks in our way of financing things and spending, making spending decisions. We can't afford to do business as usual. And all I see in the governor's proposals and in the legislature is business as usual. And I don't think Vermonters can afford it.
Well, interesting question, because as you say, all those tax expenditures, I'm sure, were originated for what seemed to be very valid.
That's right, and we can still do them, but do them outside the education fund because they're not education.
You know, can I just add one thing? We talk a lot about, it's like the healthcare, how we're going to pay for it, but what's driving the costs that are going up? Because if we bring down the rate, if we make it much more affordable, what's the property tax rate, what's going to happen is school spending is going to just leap because people aren't going to be pressuring their school boards to keep the budget under control. And I think we have to continue to look at our per pupil, teacher-pupil ratio. That's the lowest in the country by a significant amount. We have to take a look at how we deliver education to control the costs, just like healthcare.
Is this the year where we finally actually see some progress on school consolidation after years of discussion about that? It's always been a third rail, it seems like.
No, the speaker said schools keep passing their budgets. When you see significant amounts of schools voting down their school budgets, there'll be impetus for change. But as long as schools, I believe, as long as schools keep passing their budgets, they're not going to do anything at the state level.
Yeah. Let's turn to the transportation fund for a second. You alluded to that earlier. Transportation fund is a budget gap of about $36 million that needs to be closed, and one of the proposals that has come up is a gas tax increase. Gas tax that would apply to the total sale of a purchase, as I understand it, as opposed to a state tax on the per gallon price. I think I have that correct. Bottom line is it would cost a little bit more, I guess, to fill up the tank with gas, but not a whole lot more. Oh, well, I stand corrected. That I think I'm going to be stood corrected anyway. But does this idea of a slightly higher state tax on gas sort of make sense? I get the impression not.
Well, it's not that it isn't worth considering, but first of all, we need to understand we do have a per gallon tax right now. So that means it's, I think, a penny per gallon, so how much you pay depends on how much you buy. What they're talking about is lowering the per gallon rate and instituting a percentage of the price, of the cost rate. Okay. So then your tax would vary with how much gas costs. The problem is whenever the price of gas goes up, Vermonters, being pretty thrifty, use less gas. So that means there's less tax revenue to the transportation fund because we're being thrifty.
Right, because
so what they want to do is they want to even it out. They want to make it so that when the price of gas goes up, you pay more in taxes. So that the revenue going to the transportation fund kind of smooths out and they get the revenue even when the price goes up. Now, I understand it from the perspective of the transportation fund, but what that means for a Vermonter is right when gas prices are spiking, because it's a percentage, the amount of tax you're paying is bigger. So they just are going to make the effect of the increase in fuel on Vermonters' budget worse. So it totally works for the transportation fund, but I don't think it works for Vermonters. And just to go back to my favorite hobby horse of the tax exemptions, there is a tax exemption on the purchase and use of vehicles that is $27 million. Boom, it's right there. So again, if you do this kind of overall reform, you might be able to find the money in ways that don't impose such a burden. I mean, and I'm not averse to considering this balance, but I think that if people are saying it's going to be a wash, it's not. It's not going to be a wash. They're going to get $30 million from it this year. That is a tax increase, and it is a broad-based tax increase. So let's call it what it is. It may be something we need to do to keep our roads and bridges going, but let's not pretend it isn't a tax increase. It is.
What would be the alternative?
I just gave you one, the tax expenditure on purchasing vehicles. Or not robbing the transportation fund and using it in the ed fund. That would be another place to go.
What the rest of you think about that?
They've looked at alternatives, and some of the alternatives aren't ready for prime time, I guess, is what they're saying, meaning the transportation department. But just to back up a second as to what's being proposed, and this is one area I think the administration actually has been courageous in at least putting something specific on the table. My understanding is, and I might have this number wrong a little bit, is that the gas tax, the flat tax of I think it's 19 cents.
Right.
Governor's going to reduce that flat tax, I think it's by 5 or 6 cents.
14.
And then
That's per gallon.
Right. And then impose a 4% sales tax on the cost of gas, which can then fluctuate with the price of gas. It's estimated that given the current situation, that the per gallon increase for you and I when we fill up at the pump would be about 8 or 9 cents a gallon. And that's significant. There's no doubt about it. But we also have a significant problem. The estimate between our resources currently and our needs for roads and bridges, that gap is estimated at $240 million a year. That's a lot. And in a rural state, we need good roads and good bridges, not only for us to get around, but because it ties into
visitors,
our economic viability.
Right.
So I give him credit for at least proposing this and being specific and really saying that we need to step forward and get some money in the till to address these issues, because we need the money even to just draw down and leverage federal funds. And so that's what he's trying to maximize in this plan, is to maximize the idea that we're going to take every federal dollar we can, because we have very, very significant needs. The other options that they've looked at is, like trying to charge on a use fee per mile that you put on your odometer. There's GPS ideas out there, that it may be coming down the pike at some point in time.
Yeah, that was weird, if I may say so.
Big
You're
brother.
going to be monitoring you based on how much driving you do
Exactly.
via GPS?
Yeah.
How's
Yeah,
that
I
supposed to
guess
work other than
insurance
Big
companies
Brother
are looking
watching
at doing that already as part of their whole rate structure, I gather, doing it on how much you drive and possibly where you drive. But it is a Big Brother type of
Yeah, it's kind of scary, to be honest.
well, we know where you are and what you're doing. You're at the VFW scratching tickets.
Right. Well, speaking of which,
2 for 1.
I was blissfully unaware of these scratch-off, or not scratch-off tickets, but break-open tickets, I believe they're called.
Yeah.
So this is supposed to this is going to be the replacement for the heating oil tax that was originally proposed to help pay for home insulation and efficiency measures.
For weatherization, LIHEAP, $6 million going to weatherization, $6 million going to LIHEAP heating fuel assistance, and $5 million going to the Clean Energy Development Fund is what the governor's proposed. I wouldn't take this money to the bank.
In this
It's a 10
break-open
cent.
ticket
It
economy
works
here
out to
to-
it's an excise tax, but it works out to be about 10 cents on the ticket. What means these organizations will cut down by about 50% what they make. On a box of 4,000 of these, when we did the back of the envelope math, it was about $840 that they make now. They'd end up making about $400 if they sold every ticket. So the theory is it's possible that they're going to think it's not worth doing this anymore, and I wouldn't take that money to the bank. So, I wouldn't use that money in budgeting. It seems really funky, doesn't it?
This is
It's an unusual idea, but
But we want it for the ed fund. And speaking of which, the $17 million that the government we've talked about, it's not for pre-K. The $17 million is for earned income tax credit. It's for child care, for early child care. So it wasn't going to pre-K.
Oh, okay.
Which we were all confused at the governor's budget address. It sounded like pre-K, but it wasn't. It was for the younger children.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes left before we have to go, and had a couple other quick issues just to toss out there, just to kind of see what you thought the feeling in Montpelier was. One of them is the marijuana decriminalization bill. And Patti, I understand you're working on a bill along those lines. What do you think the chances are of that happening? It seems like maybe we're at that point.
We may be at that point. It's stronger. There seems to be stronger consensus now. I've been talking to the Commissioner of Public Safety over the years, and he thinks at this point, we're ready to do this. It would be an ounce or less. What's being drafted up is it's decriminalized, so it's still a civil penalty like a traffic ticket. So it's still in compliance with the federal law. You're still considering it a crime. And but you're going to pay a fine. You're not going to. The problem that we heard was people who have this on their record can't get student loans, can't get into certain government housing. Probably can't. Can I get into Canada? I think there's some issues you can't even get into Canada. So there were long-term ramifications for people who did something in their past that was unwise.
Do you feel like this is a bill that's probably going to make it through, or is it going to face some opposition?
I think it's going to make it through, but it will be over my opposition. I understand the problems about the records, and I think there might be a way to do it that if you get caught with this small amount of marijuana, you get diverted into drug program or counseling, and nothing ever goes onto your record. So it's pre-arraignment or pre-charge or something like that. But no one is forced to smoke marijuana. And everyone should know that, in fact, it's illegal and there are consequences. So, I understand the problem of having something on your record because of a mistake you made in the past, but I think there might be other ways to deal with that rather than what I consider to be really kind of giving people using marijuana a pass. If you're using marijuana right now, you are part of a criminal enterprise and you are supporting drug traffickers and narco-terrorism, as far as I'm concerned. The fact that you may only use small amounts and you've never done anything to everybody does not relieve you of complicity in that organized crime, in my personal opinion. So if there are problems with young people who can't get access to certain kinds of things, let's deal with that. But until we have a better way of dealing with the drug program, I think that this kind of approach is going to encourage more young people to use marijuana. There's a lot of evidence that long-term use of marijuana affects your ability to learn and remember. So here we want all these math and science whizzes, and we're going to do something that gives them a pass if they use marijuana, which makes them stupid. So, I'm sort of like, how is this? Are employers still going to be able to test employees for marijuana? Because employers have a lot of trouble finding employees that can pass drug tests. Will the police have a field and a blood test for driving under the influence of marijuana? I think we need to think about all of the implications everywhere in our society of the consequences of giving people caught with small amounts of marijuana. Remember, that doesn't mean they aren't even dealers. They just only have an ounce when they're caught. So I have grave reservations about this piece of legislation.
Okay. What about the Death with Dignity bill? That's another one that's come up in the past. It's never really made it through. I gather it's going to be reintroduced again. Any sense that this is the year that maybe this finally might pass?
I don't know that I have a sense of whether this might be the year or not. I know I favor it. But I understand some of the impediments this might be considered that it had last year, and I don't know whether that's changed. And if it hasn't changed, I don't know what the chances are that it would make it through this year.
Okay.
No, I think the Senate's going to be the key again. I think the House, in the House, the votes are there. I support it, and I think the votes are in the House. But the problem has been in the Senate, at least last year, and there was a reluctance to move it forward. This year, there may be more of an open mind about taking it up in the Senate, possibly. But I think that's the key, what happens in the Senate.
Okay. One last question. Wind moratorium, I gather, is another potentially contentious subject of whether or not to put a statewide moratorium on new wind development. Just real quick, because we're almost out of time. What do the four of you feel about that? Is that a good idea? We'll start with you, Cynthia, and go around the table.
Well, I don't know that we really need a moratorium, although I did sign on to the bill in the House, but what we really need is to change the process. Right now in Arlington, you cannot build anything above 1,200 feet. But the Public Service Board could say, well, no, we're going to let them put a windmill there.
Because it comes
That's
through
not right.
Different...
It's not right. It has to go through Act 250, or if it stays in the Public Service Board, the towns have to have a chance for their zoning to apply. I think the state needs to be reminded that the towns existed before Vermont was even a glimmer in Ethan Allen's eye, because they are just like ramroding things into the towns that don't want them. It's wrong.
Okay.
I want to see what the governor's siting commission comes up with, and so I wouldn't support the moratorium before I at least had an opportunity to see what their conclusions and recommendations are.
Okay.
He stacked that commission.
I support it. We should really take a pause and see if it's effective, what we're getting for what we're spending, or what those people are making up there. It'll come out of the Senate, I believe. It'll definitely, Bob Hartwell's the chair of Natural Resources, our senator. So I don't know that it's got the support in the House.
Okay. In your district, there have been a couple of contentious wind projects discussed.
There have.
Glebe Mountain, I know, being one. So how do you think that a moratorium would play over your way?
I think a moratorium would play well over my way, and I think at this point in time that I'll support it.
Well, I guess there's been a lot of controversy in some of the recent ones with Lowell Mountain and one that was recently proposed out in West Rutland and Castleton that ran into a lot of opposition. So, yeah, at the same time, I sometimes wonder, how do we get to our clean energy nirvana if we exclude wind from the mix?
Even wind won't get us there. This is another one of those like holy grails, and it's not really useful as a bicycle.
All right. Well, as usual, despite the fact of taking longer than normal, we left a lot of issues undiscussed, but I want to thank all four of you for taking the time to be with us today and to share your views on these and other very important issues facing the state this year. I want to thank Cynthia Browning and Jeff Wilson, representatives from Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and Sunderland. Most of Sunderland, that is. You know, it's interesting how Sunderland now has 3 representatives.
I know. We made that point to them, and they're like,
Does that mean we're going to get more state revenue for something, or?
More representation.
And Patti Komline from Dorset, Land Grove, Peru, Danby and Mount Tabor, and Charles Tim Goodwin from Jamaica, Stratton, Weston, Windhall, and Londonderry. You know, it's been bothering me the last hour that I didn't get that right the first time.
Thank you for doing this.
Thanks a lot.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Well, thank you, and thank all of you for watching. This has been the front page on GNAT TV. Hope you have a good day, and we'll see you again the next time. Thank you very much.